The rain hammered against Clara Owens's face as she stood in the doorway of what could barely be called a home, watching water pour through a dozen gaps in the roof, and walls like nature itself wanted to wash her away. She had bought this shack 3 months ago with the last of her inheritance, thinking she could make a life for herself in Fort Laramie, Wyoming, away from the suffocating expectations of St. Louis society. Her aunt had died and left her $200, and Clara had taken it as a sign from God that she could finally escape the marriage her parents had arranged to a banker twice her age. She was 22 years old, and she would rather starve on the frontier than become Mrs. Herbert Cornwall and spend her days pouring tea and pretending to care about railroad investments. But now, standing in this miserable excuse for shelter as the September storm of 1878 tore through the Wyoming territory, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Water pooled on the floor around her bare feet. The wind screamed through cracks in the walls wide enough to fit her fist through. Her few possessions were getting soaked, including the quilt her grandmother had made, the one thing she had brought that held any sentimental value. Clara grabbed a tin pot and positioned it under one of the worst leaks, then another pot under a second stream. She had 6 pots total. There were at least 15 holes. The wind sent icy water sideways through the wall gaps, soaking her dress until it clung to her skin. She was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. She had tried to patch the holes herself last week with old newspapers and flour paste, but the rain had dissolved her repairs in minutes. She needed wood, nails, proper tools. She needed money she did not have. The job she had taken at the general store paid $3 a week, barely enough for food. She had been eating mostly beans and cornmeal for weeks now. Clara sank onto her narrow bed, the only piece of furniture she owned besides a wobbly table and one chair. She pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, trying to conserve warmth. The storm showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it was getting worse. Thunder rolled across the plains like cannon fire. Through the rain, she heard the sound of horse hooves. She tensed. Fort Laramie was generally safe, nestled near the old military fort, but a woman alone was vulnerable. She had learned that quickly. Men assumed things about a woman living by herself. They propositioned her. They made crude comments when she walked to work. One had tried to force his way into her shack 2 weeks ago, and she had grabbed her father's old pistol and aimed it at him with shaking hands until he left. The hoofbeats stopped outside her door. Clara stood quickly, her heart pounding. She reached for the pistol on the table. Then came a knock. Firm but not aggressive. "Miss, you all right in there?" The voice was deep, concerned, with a slight Texas drawl. Clara did not answer. She kept the pistol ready. "I am not here to cause trouble, miss. Name is Ben Tucker. I am staying at the boarding house down the road, and I saw your roof from outside. Looks like you have got a serious problem with this storm." Clara moved closer to the door but did not open it. "I am fine. Thank you for your concern." "Begging your pardon, miss, but you do not sound fine. Sounds like you have got waterfalls coming through your ceiling." There was a pause. "I am a carpenter by trade. Well, cowboy mostly, but I know my way around repairs. I have got tools in my saddlebag. I could patch those holes for you before nightfall if you would let me." Clara hesitated. She desperately needed help, but accepting it from a strange man felt dangerous. Still, she was freezing. Everything she owned was getting ruined, and she could not survive a night in these conditions. Sometimes you had to choose between risks. She opened the door a crack, keeping the pistol behind her back. The man standing on her sagging porch was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his mid-20s with dark hair plastered to his head from the rain. He wore typical cowboy gear, soaked through, and he held his hat in his hands respectfully. His eyes were a warm brown, and when he saw her bedraggled state, genuine concern crossed his face. "Lord have mercy," he said softly. "You are soaked through. How long have you been dealing with this?" "Since the storm started, about 2 hours ago." Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. "Why would you want to help me?" Ben Tucker looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Because you need help, miss. Is not that reason enough? He glanced past her at the interior of the shack, and she saw him take in the multiple leaks, her few poor possessions, the general state of desperation. His jaw tightened. I cannot in good conscience leave you like this. If you're worried about propriety or safety, I understand. You could stand out here on the porch with that pistol I am guessing you have got behind your back and watch me work. But please, miss, let me help. Clara studied his face. She had gotten good at reading people in her months out west. You had to. This man seemed sincere. More than that, he seemed genuinely distressed by her situation. All right, she said finally, but I will be watching. Yes, madam. I would expect nothing less from a smart woman. Ben settled his hat back on his head and turned to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding tied to the post that was barely holding up her porch. He pulled saddlebags off and dug through them, producing a hammer, nails, and several tools wrapped in oilcloth. Clara wrapped a thin shawl around her shoulders and stood in the doorway watching as Ben Tucker surveyed the damage. He walked around the exterior of the shack first, studying the walls and roof. She saw him shake his head several times. When he came back around, his expression was grim. Miss, I have got to be honest with you. This place was barely standing before the storm. The previous owner should be ashamed selling this to anybody. He held up a hand when she started to protest. But I can patch it enough to get you through tonight and tomorrow. After that, it is going to need serious work. The roof needs new shingles in about 8 places. The walls need new boards in at least 6 spots. And your foundation is sinking on the west side. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but blinked them back. I spent everything I had buying this place. Ben's expression softened. Then we will work with what we have got. Let me start with the roof. Do you have a ladder? No. All right, I will manage. He rolled his shoulders and looked up at the roof, which was barely 8 feet high. The shack was tiny, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet total. He walked back to his horse and retrieved a coil of rope and a piece of canvas tarp. This tarp is going to be your best friend tonight. I am going to nail it down over the worst of the roof damage. It will not be pretty, but it will keep the rain out. True to his word, Ben Tucker got to work. Clara watched as he climbed onto her roof using a combination of the porch post and his own considerable strength. Pulling himself up with an ease that spoke of years of physical labor, he moved carefully across the wet shingles, testing each step. Within minutes, he had the canvas tarp positioned over the largest holes and was hammering nails to secure it. The sound of the hammer was steady and sure. With each strike, less water poured into Clara's home. She found herself relaxing slightly, though she kept the pistol close. The rain continued to pour, but the drumming on the tarp was different from the sound of water pouring through gaps, more solid, more protective. After the roof, Ben climbed down and started on the walls. He had several flat pieces of wood in his saddlebag, some of them rough cut, others that looked like they had been salvaged from other projects. He measured gaps with his hands, cut pieces to size with a small saw, and hammered them into place over the worst holes. Some gaps he stuffed with strips of canvas and sealed with pine tar from a small tin. Clara watched his hands as he worked. They were large and calloused, scarred in places, the hands of a man who had worked hard his entire life. But they moved with precision and care. He was not just slapping repairs together. He was taking his time, doing it right. An hour passed, then 2. The storm continued, but inside the shack things were improving. The waterfalls had stopped. The wind no longer howled through the walls. It was still cold and damp, but it was survivable. Ben worked without stopping, soaked to the bone, his shirt clinging to his frame. Clara noticed he was shivering, but he never complained. He just kept working, methodical and focused. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, Ben hammered the last nail into place and stepped back to survey his work. He was breathing hard, and his hands were raw and red from the cold and wet. That should do it, he said, flexing his fingers. It is not perfect, but it will hold through this storm, and probably through the winter if we do not get anything too harsh. Come spring, you should really think about getting someone to do proper repairs. Clara stepped fully outside for the first time, pulling her shawl tight, and looked at her shack. The canvas tarp on the roof was secured with at least 30 nails. Every wall gap had been patched with wood or sealed with tar and canvas. It looked rough and cobbled together, but it looked functional. "How much do I owe you?" Clara asked quietly. Ben shook his head. "Nothing, miss. I cannot accept charity. It is not charity, it is basic human decency." Ben gathered his tools and started putting them back in his saddlebags. "You are trying to make a life out here on your own. That takes courage. The least I can do is make sure you have got a roof that does not leak." Clara felt something tighten in her chest. No one had been kind to her without expecting something in return since she had arrived in Fort Laramie. The store owner who employed her made comments about her figure. The landlord who sold her this shack had knowingly cheated her. The men in town looked at her like she was either foolish or available or both. But this man, this stranger, had spent hours in the freezing rain fixing her home and wanted nothing in return. "At least come inside and warm up before you go," Clara heard herself say. "I can make coffee. It is the least I can do." Ben hesitated, and she saw him considering the propriety of it. A single man entering a single woman's home could start gossip that could ruin her reputation, such as it was. "Just for a few minutes," Clara added. "You are shivering. You will catch your death riding back in this storm while you are soaked through." "All right," Ben agreed. "Just for a few minutes." They went inside, and Clara immediately noticed the difference. The shack was still cold and damp, but it was quiet. No water dripped, no wind screamed. It felt like shelter instead of a sieve. She stirred the embers in her small stove and added kindling, building up a fire. She had a battered coffee pot and a small sack of real coffee beans, a luxury she allowed herself once a week. She ground some beans with a hand mill and put the pot on to boil. Ben stood awkwardly near the door, water pooling around his boots. He looked around the sparse interior, and Clara saw understanding dawn in his eyes. She had almost nothing. A bed, a table, a chair, a trunk that held her few clothes, some pots and pans hanging on nails. That was it. "You have been out here for a while?" he asked carefully. 3 months. I came from St. Louis." "That's a long way." "Family out here?" "No family anywhere anymore. My parents died of cholera 5 years ago. I lived with my aunt after that, and she passed in June. She left me a small inheritance, and I decided to head west." Clara poured water from a bucket into the coffee pot. "I wanted to make my own way, on my own terms." Ben nodded slowly. "I can respect that. Not many women would have that kind of courage. Or that kind of foolishness, depending on who you ask." A small smile tugged at Ben's mouth. Sometimes courage and foolishness are two sides of the same coin. The coffee began to boil, and Clara poured 2 cups. She handed one to Ben and wrapped her hands around the other, savoring the warmth. They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, drinking coffee while the rain continued outside, muffled now by the repairs. "What brings you to Fort Laramie?" Clara asked. "Work. I have been driving cattle up from Texas the last few years, but I'm getting tired of the trail. Thought I might settle somewhere, find steadier work. A friend told me they were hiring ranch hands at one of the big spreads north of here, so I came to see about it." "Are you going to take the job?" "Maybe. I have not decided yet." Ben took another sip of coffee. "Ranching is good work, but it ties you down. I have been moving around since I was 15, not sure I know how to stay in one place anymore." "Why did you start moving at 15? Ben's expression darkened slightly. "My father died, kicked by a horse. My mother had passed when I was young, and I did not have any siblings. No family to speak of, so I hit the trail, found work where I could. Been doing it ever since." Clara heard the loneliness in his voice, and it echoed something in her own chest. They were both unmoored, drifting without family or roots. "I'm sorry about your father," she said softly. "Thank you. It was a long time ago." Ben finished his coffee and set the cup on the table. "I should get going. Let you get settled for the night." Clara wanted to ask him to stay longer, but she bit her tongue. She had already pushed propriety by inviting him in at all. "Thank you again for everything. I do not know what I would have done without your help." "You would have figured something out. You seem resourceful." Ben grabbed his hat and moved toward the door, then paused. "Miss, if you do not mind my asking, what is your name? I have been calling you Miss this whole time, but it seems like we ought to know each other's names by now." Clara Owens." "Miss Owens." Ben touched the brim of his hat. "It was a pleasure meeting you, even under these circumstances." "Just Clara is fine, and thank you, Ben. Truly." He smiled at the use of his first name, a genuine, warm smile that made his whole face change. Then he was out the door, untying his horse and swinging up into the saddle despite the wet and cold. Clara stood in the doorway, watching as he rode away into the storm, his figure becoming a dark shape, and then disappearing entirely into the rain and approaching dusk. She closed the door and leaned against it, feeling strange. The shack was quiet and dry. For the first time in hours, she was not actively uncomfortable, but she felt the absence of Ben Tucker like a physical thing, as if something had left with him. Clara shook her head at herself. She was being ridiculous. He was a stranger who had done a kind deed. That was all. She could not afford to build fantasies around every person who showed her basic decency. She changed into dry clothes, which consisted of her only other dress, and hung the wet one near the stove to dry. She ate a cold supper of beans and cornbread left over from breakfast, too tired to cook anything hot. Then she crawled into bed, pulling her damp but salvageable quilt around her, and listened to the rain on the canvas tarp above her head. She thought about Ben Tucker's hands as he worked, the concentration on his face, the way he had looked at her shack with such concern, as if her well-being actually mattered to him. She thought about his smile. Then she forced herself to stop thinking about it at all and closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through the gaps around her door and window. She lay in bed for a moment, relishing the fact that she was dry and relatively warm. The canvas tarp had held through the night. The wall patches had not leaked. Ben Tucker's repairs had saved her. Clara got up and dressed, then assessed the damage from the storm. Her floor was still damp, and everything smelled of moisture, but nothing was ruined. She spread her possessions out to dry and started a fire in the stove to warm the space and help with the drying process. She had to go to work at the general store today. Mr. Hutchins expected her at 8 o'clock sharp, and he docked pay for any lateness. Clara washed her face with cold water from the bucket, brushed and pinned her hair, and put on her cleanest dress. Then she locked her door with a simple latch and walked the half-mile into the main part of Fort Laramie. The town was bustling this morning. The storm had passed and people were out dealing with its aftermath. Several buildings had lost shingles. A tree had come down near the old fort. Mud was everywhere. Clara picked her way through it, holding her skirts up, and arrived at Hutchins' General Store just as the clock tower at the fort struck 8. Mr. Hutchins was a portly man in his 50s with mutton chops and a perpetually skeptical expression. He looked Clara up and down as she entered. "You are here. I thought maybe the storm had washed you away." "No, sir, I am here." "Good. The shelves need restocking. We got a shipment yesterday before the storm, and everything is still in crates out back. Get to it." Clara spent the morning hauling crates and unpacking goods. Flour, sugar, coffee, canned foods, fabric, ammunition, tools. She priced everything with a grease pencil and arranged it on the shelves according to Mr. Hutchins's very particular system. Her back ached, and her hands got sore from prying open crates, but she did not complain. $3 a week was $3 a week. Around noon, the bell above the door chimed, and Clara looked up from the shelf she was organizing to see Ben Tucker walk in. Her heart did an unexpected little jump in her chest. Ben saw her immediately, and his face lit up with a smile. "Clara, good to see you made it through the night." "Thanks to you," Clara said, aware that Mr. Hutchins was watching them from behind the counter with interest. "The repairs held perfectly." "Glad to hear it?" Ben approached the counter. I need to pick up a few supplies, soap, coffee, some jerky if you've got it. We have all of that, Mr. Hutchins said, suddenly attentive. He recognized a paying customer. Clara, get this gentleman what he needs. Clara gathered the items while Ben browsed the store. She was hyper-aware of his presence, the way he moved through the space, the way he examined a display of knives with the eye of someone who knew quality. When she brought his items to the counter, Ben paid without haggling, which was unusual. Most people in Fort Laramie haggled over everything. As Mr. Hutchins counted change, Ben leaned closer to Clara and said quietly, I have been thinking. Those repairs I did yesterday, they are going to need some reinforcement before winter really sets in. I am going to be in town for at least another week, waiting to hear back about that ranch job. If you would like, I could come by and do a more thorough job on your place. Properly, I mean. Clara felt torn. She desperately needed the help, but she also knew she could not pay him, and the thought of being further in his debt made her uncomfortable. Ben, I cannot afford to pay you for that kind of work. I'm not asking for payment, I'm offering to help. Ben's brown eyes were steady and sincere. Look, I know it is not proper for me to just show up at your place and start hammering away, so how about this? I will work during the day when you are here at the store, so there is no question of impropriety. I will leave before you get home. That way people cannot talk, and you get a house that will keep you alive through winter. Mr. Hutchins was watching them now with undisguised curiosity. Clara lowered her voice. Why are you doing this? Ben looked uncomfortable, as if he was not used to explaining his motivations. My mama died when I was young, and my pa raised me alone. One winter when I was about 8, our roof started leaking something terrible. We did not have the money or the materials to fix it proper. A neighbor came by, a man named Jim Seward, and he spent 3 days fixing our roof. Would not take a penny for it. Just said, that is what neighbors do. They help each other. Ben met her eyes. I am just paying forward what was done for me once, that is all. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. All right, she said softly. Thank you. I will start tomorrow if the weather holds. Ben took his supplies and left, and Clara went back to stocking shelves, very aware that Mr. Hutchins was staring at her. Who was that? He asked. No. A man who helped me during the storm yesterday. My roof was leaking. Mr. Hutchins did not look convinced that was all there was to it, but he did not press further. Get back to work. Clara did, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about Ben Tucker showing up at her shack again tomorrow, working on her home, making it livable. She thought about his smile and the way he said her name. Over the next week, a routine developed. Clara would leave for work in the morning, and when she returned in the evening, she would find new repairs completed on her shack. One day, the west wall had 3 new boards properly installed. Another day, a section of the roof had new shingles. On the 3rd day, Ben had somehow leveled the sinking foundation on the west side, propping it up with rocks and new support beams. He always left before she got home, as promised. But he also left little signs of his presence. Fresh wood shavings on the ground, tools arranged neatly. Once, he left a small bundle of wildflowers on her table with no note. Clara found herself hurrying home each evening, eager to see what he had accomplished. Her shack was transforming from a barely livable hovel into an actual home. The walls were solid. The roof was tight. The floor no longer sagged in places. On the 6th day, Clara got home to find Ben still working. He was on the roof, installing the last few shingles, and the sun was lower than usual. He must have started late. She stood watching him work, and when he climbed down, he looked surprised to see her. Sorry, he said immediately. I meant to be gone before you got back. I got a late start today. It is fine. Clara looked at the roof. It was completely repaired now, proper shingles covering every inch. Ben, this is too much. You have done so much already. Just wanted to finish what I started. He wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. Your place is solid now. Should keep you warm and dry all winter. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She tried to blink them back, but one escaped anyway, rolling down her cheek. Ben looked alarmed. Did I do something wrong? No, Clara said, quickly wiping the tear away. No, you did everything right. No one has ever done something like this for me before, not expecting anything in return. You do not owe me anything, Clara? I want to make you dinner, Clara blurted out. It is not much, but I can cook a decent meal. It is the least I can do, please. Ben hesitated, and she could see him weighing propriety against his own desires. Finally, he nodded. All right, thank you, I would like that. Clara felt a flutter of nervousness as she let them both into the shack. It looked so different now from when Ben had first seen it. Solid, secure, almost cozy in the evening light filtering through the window. She started a fire in the stove and began preparing food. She had been saving ingredients for a special occasion, and this felt like one. She made biscuits from scratch, cooked beans with salt pork and molasses, and even made a simple apple compote from dried apples she had been hoarding. Ben sat at the table and watched her work. You do not have to go to all this trouble. It is not trouble. It is thank you. Clara stirred the beans. Tell me more about yourself. You have been fixing my house for a week, and I barely know anything about you except that you drive cattle, and you are good with your hands. Ben chuckled. Not much to tell. I was born in Texas near Austin, grew up on a small ranch. After my pa died, I took work wherever I could find it. Worked on ranches, drove cattle up to Kansas and Nebraska, did some carpentry when ranch work was scarce. I have been doing it for 10 years now. Do you like it? The moving around? Ben considered this. I used to. It felt like freedom, you know? Not being tied down to any one place or person, but lately, I have been feeling restless in a different way, like maybe I have been running from something instead of running towards something. Clara turned to look at him. What do you think you have been running from? Loneliness, maybe, or commitment. Hard to be lonely when you're always moving, always meeting new people, but you also never make real connections. You're always saying goodbye. Ben rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable with how much he was revealing. Sorry, that is probably more than you wanted to know. Not at all. I understand what you mean. Clara pulled the biscuits from the oven and started plating food. I think that is part of why I came out here. I was tired of living a life that felt like it belonged to someone else, my parents, my aunt, society. I wanted to see if I could make a life that was truly mine. How is that going? Ben asked with a slight smile. Better now that my roof does not leak. Clara brought the plates to the table and sat across from him, but honestly, it has been harder than I thought. People do not take me seriously. Men either treat me like I am foolish or like I am available. Women mostly ignore me because I do not fit in with their social circles. I am neither married nor looking to be married, and that makes me strange. You are not strange. You are independent. That threatens people. They ate, and the conversation flowed naturally. Ben told her stories about his years on the trail, about stampedes and river crossings and nights under the stars. Clara told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her parents' deaths, about the suffocating expectations that had driven her west. The food disappeared, and they kept talking. Hours passed. Clara could not remember the last time she had felt this comfortable with another person. Ben listened when she spoke, really listened, and he shared things about himself that she suspected he did not tell many people. Finally, Ben noticed how dark it had gotten outside and stood reluctantly. I should go. It is late. Clara stood too, not wanting him to leave, but knowing he had to. Thank you for dinner and the conversation. Thank you for making dinner. It was the best meal I've had in months. Ben gathered his hat. I got word from the ranch today. They are offering me the job. Good pay, steady work. Clara's heart sank, though she tried not to show it. That is wonderful. Congratulations. I told them I would think about it. Ben looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. The thing is, I have been in Fort Laramie for over a week now, and I have been happier this week than I have been in years, and I think that has a lot to do with you. Clara's breath caught. Ben, I know it is crazy. We barely know each other, but I feel like I can talk to you in a way I cannot talk to other people, like you see me, really see me, And I think I see you too. Ben took a step closer. I want to stay in Fort Laramie, not for the ranch job, but to see where this goes. You and me, if you want that too. Clara's heart was pounding. I do want that. I have been thinking about you constantly all week. I thought I was being foolish. You are not foolish. Ben reached out and gently took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, and his touch sent electricity through her. I do not know what this is or where it goes, but I would like to find out. So would I, Clara whispered. They stood there holding hands, looking at each other in the lamplight, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. Something that felt like hope and possibility, and the beginning of something profound. Ben left that night, but not before making plans to see her again the next evening. As Clara closed the door behind him and leaned against it, she felt like she was floating. Her shack was solid around her, warm and dry and secure. And maybe, just maybe, her heart was opening up too. Over the following weeks, Ben and Clara spent every possible moment together. He took the job at the ranch, which meant he was working long days, but he always found time to see her. He would show up at the general store during his lunch break, or he would be waiting outside when she finished her shift, ready to walk her home. They took long walks around Fort Laramie, talking about everything and nothing. They had dinners together in her tiny shack, cooking side by side in the small space. Ben continued to make small improvements to her home, building her a second chair so he would have a place to sit, adding a shelf for her dishes, fixing the door so it closed properly. Clara found herself falling for him in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had never felt this way about anyone. The banker her parents had wanted her to marry had left her cold. The few men who had courted her insane. Louis had seemed interested only in her modest inheritance or her family connections. But Ben looked at her like she was something precious. He listened to her opinions and never dismissed them. He made her laugh. He held her hand when they walked, and the simple touch felt more intimate than anything she had experienced before. 6 weeks after they met, Ben took her on a picnic up into the bluffs overlooking the North Platte River. It was late October, and the aspens were turning gold. The air was crisp and clean, and the views stretched for miles. They sat on a blanket Ben had brought, eating sandwiches and apples, watching the river wind through the valley below. I love it here, Clara said softly. I know my shack is small and my life is hard, but I love the freedom of it, the bigness of this place, like anything is possible. Anything is possible, Ben agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Clara, I need to tell you something. She looked at him, her heart suddenly racing. His expression was serious. I am in love with you, Ben said, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. I have been for weeks now. I did not mean for it to happen this fast, but it did. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. You are brave and smart and kind, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it any more. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. I am in love with you too. I've been so scared to say it, but I am, completely. Ben cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. I want to marry you, Clara. I want to build a life with you, a real life, here in Fort Laramie or wherever you want to go. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every night. I want everything with you. Yes, Clara whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Ben kissed her then, soft and sweet at first, then deeper, as Clara wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him closer. It was her first real kiss, and it felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ben rested his forehead against hers. I do not have much to offer you. I have some savings, but not a lot. I am just a ranch hand. You are everything I need, Clara said fiercely. I do not care about money or status. I care about you. They stayed on the bluff until the sun began to set, wrapped in each other's arms, making plans for their future. They would get married as soon as possible. Ben would continue working at the ranch while they saved money. Eventually, they would buy their own land, start their own ranch. They would build a real house, a proper home. 2 weeks later, they were married by the minister at the small church in Fort Laramie. Clara wore her best dress with wildflowers in her hair. Ben wore a new shirt he had bought specially for the occasion. They had no family present, but several of Ben's co-workers from the ranch came, and Mr. Hutchins even closed the store for an hour to attend, which Clara suspected was more out of curiosity than affection. It did not matter. When Ben slipped a simple gold band on her finger and kissed her as the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Clara felt like the richest woman in the world. They spent their wedding night in Clara's tiny shack, which was now their shack, and Ben made love to her with such tenderness and care that Clara cried afterward from the sheer overwhelming emotion of it all. "Are you all right?" Ben asked, immediately concerned, holding her close. "I am perfect," Clara said, kissing him. "I am just so happy. I did not know I could be this happy." Life settled into a new rhythm. Clara kept working at the general store and Ben worked long days at the ranch. Money was tight, but they were building savings. Every penny they could spare went into a tin box hidden under a floorboard in their shack, their future land fund. They made the small space work. Ben built them a proper bed frame. Clara sewed curtains from cheap fabric. They were poor by most standards, but they were rich in the ways that mattered. Winter came hard and cold, but the shack held strong against the storms. The roof Ben had repaired did not leak a drop. The walls stayed solid. They stayed warm with the stove and each other. On Christmas, Ben surprised Clara with a rocking chair he had built himself. Beautiful smooth wood with carved armrests. Clara gave him a new leather belt she had saved up for, with his initials stamped on it. They made love in front of the fire that night, and Clara thought about how far she had come. A year ago, she had been trapped in St. Louis, facing a future she dreaded. Now she was married to a man she loved beyond measure, building a life on her own terms. Spring arrived, and with it came news. The ranch owner was selling off parcels of land, and there was a section available for a good price. Ben and Clara counted their savings and realized they were close, but not quite close enough. "I could ask Mr. Thompson for a loan," Ben suggested. Thompson was the ranch owner, a gruff but fair man who respected Ben's work ethic. "Or I could ask Mr. Hutchins for more hours," Clara offered. They decided to do both. Ben approached Thompson, who agreed to loan them the difference at a reasonable interest rate. Clara took on extra work, coming in earlier and staying later at the general store. By midsummer, they had enough. They bought 80 acres of good grassland with a creek running through it about 5 miles north of Fort Laramie. The day they signed the deed, Ben picked Clara up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. "We are landowners," he said, setting her down and kissing her soundly. "We've got our own place now." Building a house and starting a ranch while both working full-time jobs was brutal. They spent every spare moment on their land. Ben worked on the house frame, and Clara helped where she could, learning to hammer nails and saw boards. They hired help when they could afford it, bringing in a couple of Ben's co-workers to help raise the walls and roof. The house was small, just 3 rooms at first, but it was theirs and it was solid. Real glass windows, a stone fireplace, a proper wooden floor. After living in the tiny shack for over a year, it felt like a mansion. They moved in on a warm September evening, exactly 1 year after the storm that had brought Ben into Clara's life. As they stood in their new home, surrounded by their few possessions, Clara felt tears streaming down her face. "What is wrong?" Ben asked, pulling her close. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. I just keep thinking about where I was a year ago, scared and alone in that leaking shack. Sure, I had made a terrible mistake coming out here. And then you showed up." Ben kissed the top of her head. "I am the lucky one, Clara. You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me a home." They started small with the ranch, buying a few head of cattle and some chickens. Ben continued working at Thompson's ranch while building their own herd. Clara quit the general store to focus on the ranch full-time, which was a relief. She had grown to hate the work, and especially to hate Mr. Hutchins and his constant inappropriate comments. Working their own land was hard but satisfying. Clara learned to tend animals, to fix fences, to ride a horse properly. Her hands got calloused, and her skin tanned from the sun. She had never been happier. That winter, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Ben on a snowy January evening as they sat by the fire. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy that scared the dog they had recently acquired. He picked her up carefully and kissed her all over her face. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "Are you ready for this?" Clara asked, suddenly nervous. "Are you kidding? I have been ready for this my whole life. I am going to be the best father. Our child is going to know they are loved every single day." Ben placed his hand on her still, flat stomach. "Hello in there. I am your papa, and I love you already." Clara cried happy tears and held her husband close, imagining their future. A baby, their own land, a life they had built together from nothing. The pregnancy was difficult at times. Clara suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and as she grew larger, the physical work of the ranch became challenging. Ben took on as much as he could, often working late into the night after a full day at Thompson's ranch. "You're going to work yourself to death," Clara scolded him one evening, watching him stumble in exhausted. "I am fine. I just want to make sure everything is ready for the baby." Clara had never loved him more than she did in those months. He built a cradle with his own hands, beautiful and sturdy. He added a fourth room to the house specifically for the nursery. He brought home fabric for Clara to make baby clothes and blankets. In late July of 1880, after 12 hours of labor with Ben gripping her hand and the local midwife coaching her through, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James, after Ben's father. Ben held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect, Clara. He is absolutely perfect." "He has your nose," Clara said, exhausted but euphoric. "Poor kid," Ben joked, but he could not stop staring at his son with wonder. Being parents was harder than either of them had anticipated. James was colicky and did not sleep well. Clara was exhausted, and Ben was stretched thin trying to work, help with the baby, and keep the ranch running. But they figured it out together. They took turns walking James when he cried in the night. They supported each other through the hard moments. And gradually, as James grew and became less fussy, they found their rhythm. When James was 6 months old, Ben made a decision. He quit his job at Thompson's ranch to focus full-time on building their own operation. It meant less money in the short term, but it meant he could be present for his family and put all his energy into their future. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. They bought more cattle, built better fences, improved the land. Clara proved to have a good head for business, managing their finances and negotiating sales. Ben was excellent with the animals and the physical labor. They made a good team. James grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's brown eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. By the time he was 2, Clara was pregnant again. This time she gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Eleanor after Clara's mother. Their house felt full of life and noise and love. 2 children running around, a successful ranch, a marriage that grew stronger every year. On a warm evening in June of 1884, Clara stood on their porch watching Ben play with James and Eleanor in the yard. James was 4 now, Eleanor 2. They were chasing fireflies in the twilight, their laughter ringing across the prairie. Ben caught her watching and walked over, leaving the children to their game. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That storm," Clara said softly. 6 years ago. My shack had holes that let in rain and wind both, and you patched them all before nightfall. You saved me that night, Ben, in more ways than just fixing my roof." Ben turned her around to face him. "You saved me too, Clara. I was just drifting before I met you. You gave me purpose. You gave me love. You gave me this." He gestured at the house, the land, their children. "You gave me everything." Clara kissed him, long and sweet, while their children played and the sun set over their land. She thought about how much her life had changed, how she had left St. Louis with $200 and a desperate dream of independence, and had found so much more than she ever imagined. She had found home. She had found love. She had found herself. Years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and hard work and joy. The ranch prospered. Ben and Clara bought more land, expanded their herd, built a barn and a proper stable. James and Eleanor grew strong and capable, learning to ride and work alongside their parents. When James was 10 and Eleanor 8, Clara gave birth to twin boys Matthew and Thomas. The house was chaos for a while, but it was happy chaos. Ben proved to be a natural father, patient and loving, playing with his children even when he was exhausted from work. Clara watched him teach James how to rope cattle, saw him read bedtime stories to Eleanor, observed him rock the twins to sleep, and fell more in love with him every day. Marriage was not always easy. They had arguments about money and decisions and how to raise the children, but they always talked through their problems, always remembered that they were on the same team. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ben took Clara back to the bluff where he had proposed. They hired someone to watch the children for the night, which was a rare luxury. They sat on a blanket watching the sunset, just like they had all those years ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Ben asked. "Marrying a broke cowboy and living this hard life?" Clara looked at him like he was crazy. "Regret it? Ben, you gave me the life I always wanted, freedom, purpose, love. I would not change a single thing." "Not even the twins keeping us up all night," Ben joked. "Okay, maybe I would change that part," Clara admitted with a laugh. "But everything else is perfect." They made love under the stars that night, and Clara felt the same electric connection she had felt the first time Ben kissed her. Time had not diminished what they had. If anything, it had deepened it. More years passed. The children grew. James turned into a tall young man who shared his father's skill with horses. Eleanor became strong-willed and independent like her mother, announcing at age 12 that she wanted to be a veterinarian, which was practically unheard of for a woman. Matthew and Thomas were inseparable, always getting into mischief together. Ben's hair started going gray at the temples. Clara found lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror, but they were happy lines, earned through years of laughter and love. The ranch was now one of the most successful in the area. They employed several ranch hands and were respected in the community. Clara had become known for her business acumen, and Ben was sought after for his expertise with cattle. When James was 19, he announced he wanted to start his own ranch with a girl he had been courting, Sarah Miller. Ben and Clara helped him buy land adjacent to theirs, and the family holdings grew. Eleanor went to veterinary school in Kansas City, one of the few women in her program. She came home with stories of discrimination and challenges, but also of her determination to succeed. Clara had never been prouder. The twins decided to stay and work the family ranch, which pleased Ben and Clara enormously. They were 21 now, strong and capable men who loved the land as much as their parents did. One evening, when Clara was 52 and Ben was 55, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Their children were grown. Their grandchildren were starting to arrive. The ranch was secure. "We did it," Clara said softly. "We built something real." Ben took her hand, the same way he had done thousands of times over their 30-year marriage. His hand was gnarled with arthritis now, scarred from decades of hard work, but his grip was still strong. "We did," he agreed, "and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "Even the leaking shack," Clara teased, "especially the leaking shack." "That is where I met you." Ben brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "That storm brought me to you, Clara. Best thing that ever happened to me." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. She thought about that terrified young woman standing in a miserable shack, watching rain pour through holes in the roof, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. She had not made a mistake. She had made the best decision of her life, and when a cowboy had appeared in the storm and patched those holes before nightfall, He had patched something in her heart too. He had shown her that kindness existed, that love was possible, that she did not have to face the world alone. They had built a life together from nothing, from a leaking shack and a chance encounter. They had raised children, built a successful ranch, and loved each other through 3 decades of hardship and joy. As the last light faded from the sky, Ben stood and offered Clara his hand. "Come on, Mrs. Tucker, let's go to bed." Clara took his hand and let him pull her up, and they walked into their house together, still hand in hand after all these years. In the distance, she could hear her grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The house Ben had built was solid around them. The land they had worked stretched out under the stars. Everything was exactly as it should be. And Clara knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly what she had been searching for when she left St. Louis all those years ago. She had found home. She had found purpose. She had found love. She had found everything in the arms of a cowboy who had taken the time to patch the holes in her shack, and in doing so had patched the holes in her heart. Years continued to unfold like the pages of a beloved book. Ben and Clara watched their family expand, their legacy grow. James and Sarah had 4 children who ran wild across the combined ranches. Eleanor eventually returned from Kansas City with a veterinary degree and a husband, a fellow veterinarian, and they set up practice in Fort Laramie. The twins both married local girls and continued working the family land. Ben and Clara became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family operation, respected throughout Wyoming territory and then Wyoming state after it achieved statehood in 1890. They were known for their fair treatment of employees, their quality cattle, and their unshakable partnership. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family threw a massive celebration. Nearly 100 people attended, including children, grandchildren, ranch hands past and present, and friends from all over the region. Long tables were set up in the yard of the house Ben had built so many years ago. During the celebration, James stood to give a toast. He was 39 now, a successful rancher in his own right, but he still looked at his father with admiration and respect. "I want to say something about my parents," James began, his voice carrying across the crowd. "When I was growing up, I took for granted that all marriages were like theirs, that all parents loved each other the way they do. It was not until I got older that I realized how rare what they have is." Clara felt Ben squeeze her hand under the table. "They built everything from nothing," James continued. "Pa showed up in Fort Laramie with just his horse and his tools. Ma had a shack that barely stood, and they created all of this." He gestured at the land, the house, the gathered family. "But more than that, they showed us what love looks like. Real love. The kind that lasts through hard times and good times. The kind that just gets stronger every year." Eleanor stood next, tears in her eyes. "Ma, you taught me that women can do anything we set our minds to. You ran this ranch's business side when people said women did not have a head for numbers. You supported my dream of becoming a veterinarian when everyone said it was impossible. You showed me what strength looks like." Matthew and Thomas stood together, speaking in the way twins often did, finishing each other's sentences. They talked about their father's patience, his skill, his unwavering dedication to family. They talked about their mother's wisdom and fierce protectiveness. By the time the toasts were done, Clara was crying openly, and Ben had suspiciously bright eyes. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them with hugs and love. That night, lying in bed, Ben pulled Clara close. 40 years, he murmured. "Where did the time go?" "I do not know," Clara said, "but I would not trade a single day of it." "Not even the hard days, the years when we barely scraped by, when the drought almost destroyed us, when we thought we might lose the ranch?" "Not even those days. We got through them together. That is what matters." Clara turned to face him in the darkness. "You are still the man who fixed my roof, Ben Tucker. You are still the man who saw me struggling and decided to help without expecting anything in return. That is who you have always been. And you are still the bravest woman I know. The woman who left everything familiar to build a life on her own terms. I am so proud of you, Clara. I am so proud of us." They fell asleep in each other's arms, the same way they had thousands of nights before. Time moved on, as it always does. Ben and Clara both slowed down as they entered their 60s and then 70s. They handed over more of the ranch operations to their children and grandchildren, but they still woke up every morning in the house Ben had built, still shared coffee on the porch watching the sunrise, still held hands when they walked. Ben's arthritis got worse, making it hard for him to do the physical work he had done his whole life. Clara developed problems with her heart, but they took care of each other the way they always had. On a summer evening in 1914, when Clara was 72 and Ben was 75, they sat on their porch watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. The family had grown enormous now. 4 children, 15 grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren so far. "Can you believe this?" Ben asked, gesturing at the chaos of playing children. "All of this came from us." "From you fixing a roof in a storm," Clara said with a smile. "Best decision I ever made. Stopping at that shack." Ben took her hand, his grip weaker than it used to be but still warm. "I love you, Clara Tucker. I have loved you for 36 years, and I will love you for however much time we have left." "I love you too," Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder, "more than I can ever say." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their legacy run and laugh and live. That night, Ben had a heart attack in his sleep. He died peacefully, Clara holding his hand, surrounded by family who had rushed to the house when she called. Clara was devastated. They had been together for almost 40 years. He was her best friend, her partner, her love. The world felt wrong without him in it. But she was also grateful. Grateful that they had had so many years together. Grateful that he had died peacefully, not in pain. Grateful for everything they had built together. At his funeral, Clara stood at his grave and spoke about the day they met. About the storm and the leaking shack and the cowboy who had stopped to help a stranger. About how that one act of kindness had changed both their lives forever. "He was the best man I ever knew," Clara said, her voice steady despite her tears, "and I was blessed beyond measure to be his wife." Clara lived for 3 more years after Ben died. She stayed in the house he had built, surrounded by family. She watched more great-grandchildren be born. She told stories about the old days to anyone who would listen, and every evening she sat on the porch and talked to Ben as if he was still there beside her. She told him about her day, about the family, about how much she missed him. On a cold January evening in 1918, Clara went to sleep and did not wake up. She died peacefully, the same way Ben had, in the house they had built together. The family buried her next to Ben, their graves side by side overlooking the land they had claimed and tamed and loved. Their headstones were simple but meaningful. Ben's read, "Benjamin Tucker, 1839-1914, beloved husband, father, grandfather, he built more than houses." Clara's read, "Clara Tucker, 1842-1918, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she built more than a ranch." And beneath both inscriptions, the family had added the same line, "Together, they built a legacy of love." Their descendants continued to work the land for generations. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down from parents to children, always with stories about the founders, about Clara, who had come from St. Louis with nothing but courage, about Ben, who had stopped to fix a stranger's roof in a storm, about a love that had started with a simple act of kindness and had grown into something that lasted beyond death, beyond time, etched into the land itself and the hearts of everyone who came after. The old shack where they had met was long gone, replaced by proper buildings and modern structures. But the house Ben had built still stood, maintained lovingly by the family. It became a tradition that newly married couples in the family would spend their first night together in that house, in the room where Ben and Clara had slept for so many years. And on stormy nights when rain hammered the roof and wind howled across the prairie, family members would sometimes swear they could feel Ben and Clara's presence in that house, not haunting, but blessing. Watching over the family they had created, the legacy they had left. Because some love stories do not end with death. Some love stories become part of the fabric of a place, woven into the land and the buildings and the people who come after. Some love stories become legend. And it all started with a shack that had holes letting in rain and wind both, and a cowboy who took the time to patch them all before nightfall, who saw someone in need and decided to help, who found love in the most unexpected place. That was how legacies were built. Not with grand gestures or great wealth, but with kindness and commitment and love that lasted through everything life could throw at it. The Tucker family knew that. They had learned it from Ben and Clara, and they passed it down through the generations, along with the land and the houses and the stories, because some things are worth more than money or property. Some things last forever. Love, family, the legacy of two people who chose each other every single day for nearly 40 years. That was what endured. That was what mattered. And on the Wyoming prairie, in a house built with love and maintained with reverence, that truth lived on.